Welcome back to the PreVetted Podcast, where we spotlight extraordinary people and remarkable talent reshaping our world. Today, I am joined by Kasper Timm Hansen. He's an independent Rails consultant based in Copenhagen. Kasper spent nearly 6 years on the Rails core team, helping maintain the framework that powers Shopify, GitHub, Basecamp, and a huge slice of the web, including almost 2 years inside 37 Signals, the company that created Rails. He now runs his own consulting practice, working with teams who want to get the most out of Rails. Kasper, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Good to be here.
It's an honor to have you here today. So for people meeting you for the first time, can you describe a little bit more of what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, these days it's actually slightly different. I'm now at a co-op where it's Spinel.coop if people want to see it, where we're a team of people we said in a team meeting recently that we're kind of pathological about doing open source. And so that's kind of where the connective tissue is. Got Andre and David from Bundler and Ruby Gems as well. And then Sam Stevenson, who's also done a ton of stuff like RBN and Hotwire and all that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And so right now we're kind of banding together and being a co-op. So we're both members in there, but also sort of owners. So if people talk to us, we don't just push it on to say other people or whatever. We also get in there, get our hands dirty, so to speak, and figure out how can we help clients do better and be faster and all that stuff. And we've taken a focus on engineering efficiency, which is basically, a mix of efficiency and effectiveness. So for instance, some of the projects we're doing is speeding up test suites because we want a little bit of a faster feedback loop than what's, for Rails apps, as grow larger, typically it's factories in RSpec and things like that. And just start slowing to a crawl. That's one of the things that happens to everybody. So yeah, so that's one of the things we're looking at. And then there's more infrastructure focus. We've looked at stuff like deployments and things like that. So it's usually been at that intersection of, actually slightly lower level than your typical Rails app, of some of that plumbing that goes beneath it. And how do you keep that clean or make it better? Or even my focus is a lot on domain modeling. So it's how do these pieces fit together? And is this its own model that's within another model? Or is it just an attribute somewhere? Or where do we want these slices to go kind of? So wide ranging it. So that's a lot of the stuff that I'm focused on right now. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that the infrastructure is something that it's not well taken care of on a lot of projects. I mean, I've been in projects where that was mishandled, and then we had a lot of bottlenecks, but nobody kind of focused on paying attention to that. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah. I guess just to put a little bit more of a broad point on it, what I'm thinking of is kind of the difference between just working on the individual features and then also the underlying system. I'm generally a big fan of, if you have a pretty good foundation, what I've seen happen is you work on something and then it ends up pushing back into the foundation, but in a way that strengthens it as opposed to creating holes or whatever. That's very abstract, but it's I don't know, you kind of know if you have it or not, which is just oh, I can clarify something over here, and now it becomes the foundation actually gets strengthened by it, as opposed to it gets slower or more confusing or whatever. But it's more about figuring out what's the actual system we're building here, as opposed to all the individual parts. So it's kind of, I also said this in a team meeting recently. Sometimes I like to think of it where I think as programmers, we can kind of get a little bit obsessed with creating the perfect unit. But then it's I might create the perfect bike pedal, but it's just supposed to go on this one bike. I don't need it to be the best thing ever. It's supposed to go on this one specific bike I'm building. It's supposed to fit into a hole. It doesn't need to be the most polished, whatever, but it has to be coupled somewhere. I just don't want it to be coupled to everything, It's just supposed to couple to this one, I guess, that metal rod or whatever. I don't know what that's called, but, that's the way I'm kind of thinking about it.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I think that the perception that I've seen, online is that Ruby is slow, that, Ruby is a few years ago, people were saying it's Ruby dead, right? I mean, I disagree. I mean, I not only because I love Ruby personally, but also because the speed that you can innovate with Ruby, it's much higher than any other coding language, right? And what you're able to provide is once you get to a level of complexity where the tools are becoming complex and slow, and I think this applies to this situation happens to any other language, right? You get to a level of complexity where that happens regardless of the speed of the language, right? And you being able to get there and boost the performance of the team by honing the tooling, I think that's amazing. So why did you decide to do a co-op? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, basically, I've been doing individual consulting for a number of years. And for the most part, I was kind of like, that actually fits me really well. Like, because what I really wanted to be is like almost like a roaming staff engineer, being able to take all that experience from like various different companies and also on a Rails core team and all that, and doing a bunch of open source. And it's like, that's quite a varied skill set there that I don't necessarily see a ton of other Rubyists have. So I feel like it plays itself well to a lot of these companies. But over time, going it alone was just proving to be a little too difficult in some ways, where it's actually nice to have people who are of the same kind of variety, if you will. That's where it was like there was a lot of mutuality in banding together with these people. Sam I'd worked with before, so I know him well, but the other people are new. But that's been really good, actually, just to have more of a sense of camaraderie that we're all in this together. And it takes a little bit of the pressure off from any one person because now there's also more like sparring. But what seemed to be really useful to me is just the fact that it's like we're all equals here. And we have a lot of that same experience where sometimes that can feel a little bit isolating because people don't necessarily work on libraries or have that kind of vast open source experience. But because we all have that, it's actually really easy to have a lot of these conversations because we've seen so much stuff. So that's kind of part of it for me. And then the other part with the specific with the co-op is that it's like we're all owners of it. So again, it has that quality there where we're not anybody's boss here. We all know how to get stuff done and go in there and do the things we need to do. And then also kind of want to get out, necessarily want to stay in forever, but that kind of stuff. And that kind of like mentality of, kind of getting at it or whatever. And then also that sense of ownership, because we're also used to that from the open source side of things, where it's like, well, nobody's tackled this problem yet. But I have an idea for how I want it to be tackled. So let's do it this way. And then you can follow that all the way through. And it's kind of the same thing for clients of like some amorphous set of requirements or whatever. They have an idea of what the problem is, but we could also go in there and figure out what it actually is that they need to fix or whatever, over time. But so it's the same thing of like, that ownership just goes both ways, kind of, both within the co-op and then also on clients' behalf or working for them, essentially.
Right. So clients can get a team that is fully committed because everybody has a share of ownership within the organization, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And,
right.
if clients talk to us, we're the people who are also doing the work. So it's not like hand off to people who have no idea, or like we're not I guess we do sales, but it's not like a sales team where it's just like we're the same people. So it's like we take the sales hat off and put the engineering hat on, or it's like both are on at the same time. I don't know what the visual image is going to be, but something like that,
Yeah, I mean, you don't have a dedicated sales team that doesn't have any experience, any technical experience. So every time a client talk with the sales team, they're actually talking with the technical people that will do the implementation, which is a big difference, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And the same, you kind of implied, you also talk about that you're not delegating the tasks to juniors that don't have that level of commitment or expertise that you and your team has, right?
Yeah, exactly. I do wish that we do it. We're still early, but I still wish that we do a little bit more for like including juniors and things like that. But I think that's going to be a little bit further down the road, and we do it differently as well. It's not just like handoff, but yeah, we haven't figured that part out yet. I still want to do something there just because of, I was a junior once, and I think Ruby is a great place to work in. So it'd be nice to have more who can do this kind of stuff and be able to hopefully like train them up really well and everything. So I'm still curious about it. We just haven't like explored that yet. That's just more like big picture thinking at some point, but it still wouldn't be that handoff part. But again, it would be that sense of ownership where it's like, yeah, we know which parts to give to someone else, but still have that sense of like shared oversight or whatever you want to call it. I don't know exactly. Again, we haven't tried it yet, but like, I'm sure we'd figure it out pretty well.
I'm happy to, tell you more offline if you want about my experience managing juniors, because I had the same, impulse of I want to train more juniors, but also on the other hand, I don't want to water down the value of the, how much the team can deliver, right? So I trained juniors that then were not up to the level that needed to be to work on the team, right? So I got kind of stuck with that underperforming junior, right? So I had some experience with that. And then the last one that really worked really well with us is we did this, it's a 3-year trainee program where we train people for 3 months before they join. And we do this with the client approval, right? So basically we vouch for the people that we present. So we train 10 to hire 5, right? We hire the best 5. And then we do that with the client. Most of the managers that we work with that we start doing that, they wanted to get more involved into that process, right? My intention was I will train them and then I will present the best ones, right? And then I can vouch for them because a junior doesn't have any experience. So the level of experience was not important. What I wanted is to figure out the work ethic, the communication skills, and a lot of things that I could train them on, how fast they could catch up on that, right? And we by working with them for 3 months, we were able to know them personally, and then we were able to make that recommendation, right? But the managers wanted to get involved. It's like, I want to see how they work on this, how they work on that. So they start filling on that process, which was, it kind of screwed up our logistics, but it was amazing because they were really engaged, right? So
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So we did that, and then after that we had a 3-year plan with a soft commitment. So basically, every year they had a performance evaluation with a salary increase and everything for the trainees, and then we worked towards what new responsibility they should own by that time, right? So that way we got a clear expectation to the trainees. We reduced that stress of, I want to ask for a raise, right? I've been there. You've probably been there. It's like, as a trainee, as a junior, it's a stressful thing. So we tried to reduce that. We were able to achieve 100% retention for the 3-year plan on both the trainee and the manager. Both were happy working on the project. So for us, that was very, very interesting, and, happy to share more details.
Nice. Yeah, that's really interesting. Just thinking about it. Yeah.
Cool. Right. Yeah. That was kind of our last evolution of the whole thing, and it worked really well, right? And then having a senior that would be accountable for the performance of the team, right? So that was the other thing, right? Yeah. But then we're able to deliver a lot of value to the client, because the rates were really, really low, but also explain that, yeah, they're really low, but they're going to be increasing year over year, and this is kind of the plan. And the dates were kind of more of a milestone than a hard date, right? Because I don't think it's fair to give a raise to somebody just for staying a year. I think it's fair to give a raise when they own certain responsibilities, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
So anyway, going back to you, how did you end up on the Rails core team?
Yeah, I mean, this is a while ago. Originally it started all the way back in 2013, where I was still like a student. And then I found on the Rails blog, I just happened to find it one day that they were doing a Google Summer Code project where Google each summer, I think they still do it, they pay a student some amount of money to work on open source. And then you have participating organizations and even companies or something like that where, well, the deal is students work on open source. And Rails was a participant that year. And so I submitted a proposal. Rails had like a built-in HTML scanner library that used regex to parse HTML. So it's both slow and it was also like insecure. And so we swapped that out for something called Loofah, which then parses using the whole gear and everything. So it's actually safe and also a lot faster. And that was what I did that year in 2013. And then in 2014, Rails' global ID thing came out. That's what backs active job. So when you do like an active job integration, whatever, you pass an active record into it, it gets serialized. You actually don't have to call find on like a post.find one or whatever. Rails handles that for you. That's global ID because it serializes a model into like a URI string essentially and does that for you. And so I just started contributing to that as well, and then became a maintainer of that. I think technically, pretty quickly after that, I just responded to a whole bunch of stuff. You could probably still find the comments and things like that. So they're all way back from like August 2014. And then in like early 2015, I had subscribed to Rails on GitHub. You could do that, like watch the repository. So I just got an email for like everything. So I just started looking at that fire hose and then sifting through it and reading stuff that I was interested in, and it's like, oh, that's too much or whatever. But then over time, I felt a little bit more confident in how that went and that flow. And, a lot of these details are now foggy, but then eventually just started reviewing stuff and getting into that. I was really interested in that. And I think pretty quickly after that, because the team already knew me, I got an issues team invite, which basically means that you're allowed to merge documentation pull requests. I don't know if it still works that way. I've been out of the project for a while now. And at the time, GitHub couldn't distinguish between someone who has commit access and someone who can only merge like documentation pull requests. So you technically got commit access, just don't merge code. And then I kept reviewing stuff here and there and quite intensely, I think, in like early 2015 period. And then I think in May or something, I got an invite to be a committer, which then means that I could merge code. And so then I could review more pull requests and then I actually could merge contributor pull requests as well. And then a year later in like June or July 2016, I then got the invite from the core team to join that. And then that was the same process throughout that whole year, just like reviewing stuff. And I think I did a couple of features as well at that point. And yeah, that was that. I didn't, from then on there, yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think that it's very overwhelming for a lot of people to start reviewing open source code. So it's very interesting to hear how you were able to get into that project and then being able to understand how everything worked and then being able to get access to start doing committing, right? Which is a big deal, right?
Yeah, for sure. I will say, I think that's partly what I see people sometimes mistake. That sometimes I think people think that open source is about the code, which it is to an extent, but it's like the right code at the right time. And I think that granularity is where a lot of people kind of fall off a little bit, because like when I have to get my code in now, and I get it if you have like a production bug and everything, but the issue was that we get a lot of people who are kind of obstinate or difficult to work with because they hadn't gone through the process. It was totally fair, but it was just like, well, I have a bug that needs fixing now. And it's like, yeah, but I don't want to maintain that. So we need to tweak this and this. But then they weren't really able to have that. When you deal with a lot of open source maintainers, because they've been through the process and been through that ringer, they're kind of more flexible. So they're like, okay, I know which things to change and whatnot. But if they're not used to that process, it's a lot like, what do you mean? Just merge it almost, not entirely. And I'm like generalizing a whole ton of like a decade of experience there. But that was where sometimes it was become easier, where people are more flexible. Like, okay, I see that. I'll make this change here. Or then they give pushback, but in a way that was also more, I don't know how to say it, like intelligent or something, where like sometimes we'd have people that were pushed back, but are like, what do you mean it's supposed to be this way? It's like, not really. And the other thing that was also slightly difficult about it was that mismatch between someone who's like a new contributor and then also you having seen, like I've reviewed over 1,000 pull requests on Rails and like helped merge that and whatever. So you get to see a lot of code throughout that whole code base. And the difficult part was that like their local maximum in their Rails app versus our local maximum from like looking at the code base over time. So it's like, hey, this is some of the code that I've written that's really good. I was like, sorry, that doesn't really impress me because I've seen. So it's like a weird mismatch between those different levels. And that's just, the nature of it. But it was like, I get where you're coming from, but like, hey, we do need some changes to make this because we have to maintain it. You're not maintaining it. So I want to see some changes to the code quality before I want to click merge, or then you do it afterwards or whatever. But I did generally enjoy that process of talking to people and giving a little bit of feedback here and there. And then, eventually merging it. I flushed a lot of that out of my memory because I'm not doing it anymore. But that's how I remember it.
And what advice would you give to people that, other software engineers that might want to do contributions, but they find it overwhelming, so eventually they don't do it? What advice would you give them?
Yeah. I like to think of it more as like, it's not about getting the code in, it's more about learning, because then it doesn't really matter if your PR gets accepted exactly as it is. Again, I get it if it's like a production bug you want to help fix or whatever, but usually that makes it a lot easier for people because it's like, oh, well, at least I learned something here, which is also the mentality you kind of want, where sometimes what you have, people show up and then they're very eager and then they submitted like 5 pull requests within like a week. And then you reviewed the first one and then you knew that they were going to go like, okay, hey, I have another pull request too. I was like, hey, I need a break. Like, I don't need to, just because I know there's 4 more waiting. And I'd much rather the people commit or contribute slightly less, but learn something from going through the whole process of it, because otherwise it's a little bit like, what are we doing here? Because then they're not learning anything. I just want to like get the code through, and I'm just a bottleneck. And it's like, I don't know. At least for me, that was kind of the part that I enjoyed. This was like 10 years ago, so who knows if it's still the same or whatever. But that's at least what I kind of enjoyed. There was a little bit of a give and take where I got to learn how to give feedback, and then you got to learn a little bit more about how to receive it. And we all sort of hopefully learned something and also ship the code eventually. And I guess the other advice is also just I do recommend still what I did, which is just watch that fire hose. Like watch everything on the repository, and then you'll get like literally an email for every comment. And you get to see which things get merged and why things get declined and stuff like that, and who's showing up and how are they communicating. And it's also a lot more about just showing up here and there and keep nibbling at it, as opposed to like full on contribute every day or whatever. I mean, I suppose you could do that, but I don't know. That's not necessarily sustainable. And then the other thing I've sometimes advised people on is like, sometimes I think for a lot of people, the contributing frequency is actually more like every 6 months to every 12 months, as opposed to, at least for Rails, as opposed to like every week or every month. You could do that over time, but yeah, I just wish more people would just let that process sink in and go through it, and then let it change them a little bit, as opposed to like, it's not the day job. So you get to dream a little bit more in a way of like, how could I actually approach this, and how could I learn something in the process as well, and how could I upskill myself as I'm doing this, as opposed to just like pummel code through. But that's my perspective. I think other people on the core team have a different perspective. I don't really know, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, I like the idea of being about learning, because I mean, when we're using any framework, any high level framework, it's easy to learn. It takes a while to learn, but it's kind of easy to learn how how to use it. But if you don't know how it works, you're missing out so much, right? So I usually, when I interview, I ask about Rails, I ask about Ruby, I ask about a little bit of C. I ask how the language is being compiled and how it's being interpreted, right? And try to poke how much that engineer knows about those things, right? Because that gives you a lot of insights, or active record, how active record work, because that allows you to understand, does the engineer understand N+1 problems, understands how databases indexes work, and if you understand the lower layers, then you have more insights on how everything works, and you are able to make things perform better, faster, and you can make better design better software overall, right? Can you tell us a little bit more what are your recommendations for people to do on the project? What advice? What are the most common things you see, becoming the bottlenecks, and what advice would you give to other software engineers that are maybe struggling with infrastructure?
Yeah, that's interesting. I tend to think a lot, just again from the Rails core experience, it's like I tend to think a lot in those patterns and the code to like help make better tooling as well. So I can sometimes be a little bit at fault for thinking that a lot of these things are just like, if we just had slightly better tooling, maybe we would fare a little bit better to help frame a lot of that, the work we're doing. So to put that a little bit more, less abstractly, I guess, is like, a lot of teams struggle with both domain modeling. That's one of my like bugaboos, and then, or pet peeves. And then also like just slow tests, or like not really being intentional with their data. So for instance, one of the projects I've got going, it's like less than 100 lines of code. It's like active record associated object. But the idea is that what a lot of people struggle with is finding a ways to extract like collaborator models from within like an active record. So it has the data, and it also has just like tons and tons of behavior, and it grows and becomes almost those like God objects. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I guess you have something like a master or a repeat person that just knows what the right choice is at every point in time. But so what I'm trying to do is pull people slightly towards that trajectory without being like, you have to figure everything out yourself. So it's just like giving people some extra language, so you can actually, when you decompose new features, you can kind of see where this concept might fit in, of like an associated object. So what it is, let's say you have like a post.find one, it finds the first post or whatever. The only thing actually it needs to be able to find a record is both that class name and then also the ID. And so my thinking was, well, what if we actually slot in like a poro like within that actual record, so you can have post : publisher .find one. And so that publisher is just a poro. Doesn't store anything in your database, but it piggybacks on the fact that it's nested within that post. So it can actually respond to global IDs. So you could pass these poros to jobs, and then you'd have like post.first.publisher. So you can get back at it again as if it's like, almost like it's a has-one relationship, but it's just in memory. And that's been pretty interesting too, that you could like, now I can actually pass these poros to jobs. Or I also did credits way back. So that was also on my mind at the time, because this is all the way back in 2022. I sort of first had the idea for this and like sketched it out and like, I think this could work. And so I wanted to make sure that also works. So you can have that automatic credit support in there. So you could use all the stuff in there. Credits was like Redis with some object types in there. Like there's some distinct types that seem to be in there, and the way that we use Redis, where I used to work. And so that was just an extraction of that. And so I just wanted to make sure that also worked. And again, it also just piggybacks on the fact that we have that post ID within the publisher, and then we can like access back and forth. Yeah, I don't know. That's been very interesting. That's one level where you can help to extract and spot some of these, I call them collaborator objects. Again, going back to that example of the bike thing, like I don't want everything to be one unit. I want to extract some of these things a little bit, but the data might still be stored on the post because that's just easier because databases, but maybe you want to untangle some of the behavior into like a dedicated scope or something. And so it also helps you organize things because you do like app/model/post/publisher.rb. So you get like automatic organization as well. We don't really have to think about it. So that was the other part. And then it makes it a little bit easier to decompose new features when you're actually like, oh, I'm working on something. I'm like, oh, I think this actually is its own thing, as opposed to not really having a place for it or having to battle a bunch of boilerplate to figure it out. It just make it slightly easier. Again, with that Rails' framing of conventions, I was like, I don't really want to have to think about this, but I also don't want to go completely into my own of like the most perfect ideal OOP thing, whatever, because I might not figure that out on every case. I want something that's slightly more pattern to be able to follow. So that's one thing that helps a little bit with the domain modeling piece. It's not meant to be like a grand solution to Rails' modeling issues. You kind of want to figure out how to decompose that record there. And sometimes I've said that your app is in the association. So that's another thing I see people kind of struggle with. It's like, again, they think in terms of units, but to me, it's really about the connection between these different objects in the system. We're building an object graph. It's not just one unit or whatever isolated from itself. We are building like small worlds essentially. So that's the other way I'm kind of seeing it. And I want to make sure that connection between these objects actually fit together or work nicely. It's tough to put into like abstract terms. So that's another thing. And then coupled with that, the other thing I see a lot is like people on FactoryBot, and then the test suite gets slower and slower time. There's a lot of setup, and in my experience, FactoryBot is like optimized for isolation. So it looks really clean on the surface where you have create something or whatever, and then you create an account, but then it pulls in everything else in the app eventually. And it's just like, I find it difficult personally. And then everything's anonymized. So when I try to go in and debug something, it's just like, well, I don't know if this, there's something that's like compared here, but the username is now different. So it wasn't what it was before. And I don't remember. And I don't know, I find it really cognitively actually kind of difficult to handle over time. And then I'd also work with Fixtures because they're supposedly better and faster. And they do let you tell a bit of a story, but it's all in YAML. And I also found that really difficult over time. So eventually I created a tool called Oaken that's sort of meant to be a match between these two things. It takes Fixtures' approach of seeding records up front, so their tester suite is pretty fast. But what you also get is you get to have data scripts that are more like recipes, and you can share them in development as well. So the data you test with, you see in your browser, is also the data you test with to help close that loop of like, what are we actually doing here in that object graph from a slightly higher level, as opposed to just like, here's the individual little thing I'm working on, but how does it actually fit in with the rest of the system? That's kind of the question I want people to ask more. So we can be a little bit more intentional with the apps we're making, as opposed to just like banging stuff out or whatever. I don't know, I hope that makes sense,
Right.
but that's
Right. Interesting. Yeah. I used to have seeds on my database that I sometimes populate on the test just for, seeing things. But yeah, I ended up having two different stories. One, the development seed, which I try to tell my stories like, okay, I have this user, I have this, whatever object I have. And then, I use that data to kind of destroy the database, seed it again, and kind of repeat, and I keep expanding into it. So I build my development examples with that. And then on the test side, I have a whole different set of examples. And then I have that cognitive load of having to kind of switch between, oh, I'm on test now, how I have to think about that, right? And and then when you start having dependencies, right? So you have a project that has tasks. So now tasks cannot live isolated, right? They need a project. So now on tests, and especially when you want to run them in parallel, now you have conflicting projects, tests, and you start getting those issues, right? Or at least I think of the test as a story, right? Like as a user, I add a task, I add another task, or whatever it is, right? And then when I start to running in parallel, it kind of breaks down because it doesn't have that level of isolation that it should have, right?
At least in my experience, I think that's fixed now. I haven't had experience. We use parallel tests with this Oaken thing, and you could do that with Fixtures as well. And they just like create several databases, and they sort of just talk to their own databases each, and then that kind of works. So it's as a way to get around that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I started doing that, but then I had to make sure that the data that I had for each test was the correct one, right? So
yeah,
I used to do a chain dependency that probably was not the best approach, but I don't know, was what I did at that time for that project, right? And then you kind of learn and then you do it differently the next one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy. That's the other part with all this stuff. It's
Right.
just difficult. There is not necessarily an easy answer. I guess for me, it was just more like what I like in that fixtures approach is like, at least you write the names down and the values down. So you create a little bit of that storytelling and you use those specifics to explain your object graph. So if you have like you said project, a task and everything, you could give those projects names and task names, but you reuse those. So you keep training on, oh, and now I remember. And if you use that as also your development seeds, at least when you sign in your browser, you could see the same thing. So it helps connect that like cognitively. So you're not learning two new different scenarios or whatever. At least to me, that makes it a lot easier. It makes it a little bit more difficult upfront when you're first joining a code base because there's a little bit more to ingest and learn or whatever. But I feel like it actually pays off pretty quickly because at least you're like, oh, we're using the same task here. And yeah, it's connected to this project here, but at least it's the same as opposed to it was like a factor about create a task, but now it also creates a project. And then like, okay, and then they're always named something different because everything's just like auto-generated. And I don't know, I just find it difficult.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. I had that same, that same issue, and I was trying to avoid kind of generating everything from the beginning, right? But once you have like a project, a username, or whatever objects you need for the, you can say, okay, I want to add a task or I want to delete that task, right? So it's easier for us to kind of understand which part of the story we are, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I find that easier as well, like over time, because you learn that
Right.
scaffolding or whatever, and you don't have to keep that in your head as much. It's like, oh, well, I'm familiar with this project and I'm familiar with this task. And so I know sort of what's on it. And you learn a little bit of that. Like, I guess there's like actually, I'm going to forget this. So it's just,
It's all good.
yeah.
It's all good. Yeah. And the same with the names of the users, right? Because if let's say you have to add a task and then you say, okay, I have to add a task, but I have to create a project and I have to create a user. So, all those dependencies, right? If you have the story, okay, I'm in project Acme or whatever it is, right? And I'm the user John, and John is a super admin, right? Then, okay, then I know I can create a task. It loads off your cognitive load because it's a story, right? And if you sync that up with development, then you can go and click and see what happens, right? And then
Yeah.
you can fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually a blog post series. I keep wanting to write like a response post to it of how I actually think Oaken does it better or like can accomplish some of the things that a blog post talk about. But it's on Blowmage. I don't know the person, but wrote a series on like fixtures, both as like documentation. And it was just all the stuff that I wanted to write. At one point, I just could never find the words for. But I found that's a really good explainer for the thinking involved in there. And I still want to write like response posts because I think actually Oaken helps facilitate the ideas in there better for most apps. It's just, on the blogging to-do list. So, but that's a recommendation there at least. There's a whole series on there.
Interesting. And what other, main problems have you seen on Rails code bases that people should focus on fixing or improving?
This might be what I have for right now in that space. I don't know if I have
Right.
any more. It's just off the top of my head. Yeah.
Right. I kind of changing topics. I'm excited about Rails 8. I started using it and I love it very much. And I'm starting to explore more and more the Ruby LLM, library from Carmine, and trying to get more features into my applications because it's been amazing how much is being improved from 7 to 8. So I'm excited for that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So you also designed a methodology, right? You call Riffing, right? Can you tell me a little bit more about what is that?
Yeah. So basically, it's a way to figure out your domain modeling and helping with that and helping you, again, decompose features and making it slightly easier to find better designs over time through exploration. So again, that's a lot of abstract stuff, but basically what it is you open up a Scratch file and you have an idea for what it is you're working on, like a broad sense of it. And then you just start writing in the code and filling in the blanks. Like, oh, I have a rough idea for what it is I want to. And then you don't necessarily run that code. And it sounds a little silly maybe, but I've actually found it to be really useful. So it's almost more like in the same way that you might with like a therapist where you have like an open dialogue and you can sort of externalize things and you can mirror it back to yourself. That's kind of what you're doing here. You're using that scratchpad as like a dialogical tool to figure out what it is you're working on. And then over time, you either like both get stuff out of your head, so things become clearer, and then, or you get other ideas for, oh, I think I need this thing, or I need this thing. And so it's kind of what I found with it is that it's actually pretty fast to run these things. It takes like an hour, and you get a lot of feedback for like at the very, very granular level for things that are missing or what else you need or how this interacts with the rest of the system. So I guess it's slightly similar to what people are doing with LLMs these days. I just like still being, it's not so much about being in control. It's more just about having your ears out and listening, essentially, because you're trying to work on that system. And I'm a little bit worried about some of the LLM stuff where we're moving so fast that we're degrading some of that trust in the code base, and that what's just like an I word I'm looking for. It's not integrity exactly. I can't figure it right now, but there's like a...
I think you're talking about craftsmanship, right?
Yeah, I guess to a degree, it's not so much about a craftsmanship. To me, it's more about I guess for me, it's more about the kind of, at least for me, I like having my ears close to the ground. So I still have a sense of what are we even doing here? As I think some people are talking about how when they use the LM stuff, like it's going fast and that's cool. But then it's like, well, what is right? What happened? And what are we doing? And so they start losing touch with what the code base is actually doing. And so there's a little bit of a loss in terms of like, what the hell is it? It is like an I word. It's not intuition exactly, but there is like it's not integrity either. I can't think of it.
Yeah, but what you're describing is that you don't know, you cannot trust the code that you don't see firsthand yourself, right?
Not exactly. It's more about, for me, it's more about the problem space itself, where sometimes what I hear from people that are very into LLM stuff is like, well, you also have to verify it. And I'm like, okay, but then how are you doing that? And so for me, at least, and they kind of have to know a little bit of how they want to solve the problem to be able to verify it. And so I'm like, okay, but then this riffing stuff is my approach to that aspect. How do we actually explore something, and how to actually get in there and play around with this problem space a little bit to have a sense of it? And you can understand where some of the issues might lurk or whatever. And you can also help de-risk a feature, because it's like, oh, well, I've at least mapped aspects of it out. And then you can figure out, like, sometimes I like to say that you set the organizational skeleton around something where it's like, all this piece is actually its own thing. I thought these two were together, but they're not. And so I could generate this stuff with whatever you want or whatever. And then you could focus more intently on the bits that are now the unclear parts. So it's kind of weird. You end up generating like a map of sorts. I was talking to someone else that just like, I done YouTube videos of this stuff as well, where you could see it online if you want, because it's a little bit easier to see how it actually works. And someone else has just seen it from there. They're like, I think I'm going to try to do this. And they were more of a senior person, and they brought a junior along. And I think they had like a 2-hour session or something. We were like looking at some sort of feature they were building out, and they were just like sketching this out over time. And then eventually it was like, okay, I think we're kind of done here. And then they left a few comments in there for some of the other things that they had also then thought about. And they just grabbed that whole piece of Ruby code and then pasted it into like a Jira ticket, because there was a map for where they needed to go then. So it's been really useful. That's the same experience I've had, where it's like, okay, now I kind of have a rough sense of what it is I actually want this to do. And that's been really useful for me. Yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about agentic coding is that you can, move faster, but you kind of lose the granularity of what's going on within the code, right? And for me, it works great. For instance, I'm finishing my book, right? I think I told you this before, but and I had to review a lot of, the editing and things like that. So what I do is I'm converting that into an audiobook, right? So I can listen to my book and the changes, and then I'm thinking about it. Does the story make sense? It kind of sounds like somebody else wrote it, right? I kind of, it's different when you read it. You type and read it. It's kind of one channel in your mind. It's a different channel in the ear, kind of, right? So I can pick up my son to school, and I have like 30 minutes of just listening for, a few chapters. So anyway, I built a tool to do that, and I work with Claude and say, okay, what is the fastest way that I can do the audio conversion? And basically, Claude said we should build it with Swift, we should build it with ANE, right? The text to speech engine, right? And so we kind of went through different options. I don't know Swift, and I said, okay, let's go and build it, right? So it built it. I review the code, even though I don't know the syntax, but it was 15 times, 20 times faster than the previous tool that I was using. So it was good enough, right, for my internal audiobook tool thing, right? What I'm trying to say is that for that scenario, agentic coding is great because I can move faster. I don't need to learn Swift. Probably the code is not as good as if I know Swift and I read it and I realize, oh, you know what, this is, there are design issues, right? When I write Ruby code with agents and I read it, I realize that it's lower quality that I would write, but I haven't had to write it. So I can provide that guidance and say, okay, these are the requirements. This is what I want to build. These are the rules that you need to follow. And then with that, it does a much better job, even though I had to do iterations with the agent to kind of improve the quality of the code. But it's for a lot of things where good enough is good enough, then it works, right? But I do feel that I'm losing that craftsmanship where I could, if I have the time, I could build it so, beautifully compared to what agents could do, right?
Yeah, for me, it's more just like staying close to that problem space that we're actually looking at, as opposed to like the ultimate code shape or whatever, because it's not so much about that for me. Like the other thing I get out of this process is also just because I'm kind of dispensing with a lot of process. Like I'm not necessarily running migrations. I'm not necessarily doing separate files. So it makes it a lot easier and also not necessarily doing Git commits because it's a little bit more like a rough first draft of things of what do I actually think here and where I think I need to go. I end up exploring a lot of like alternatives and also like naming as well of just like, oh, it's actually a lot easier just to change something because it's just in this one like slightly messy scope. And you might get working code out of that. You might not, but it's not really the point of the process. It's more about like having that sense of exploration. And then you can also like surface a lot of stuff that you might not have seen if like an LLM just generates you like whatever. And you're like, well, where's the noise? Where's the signal and all this stuff? I don't really know. But at least for me, doing that exploration up front helps me find that. And then you could always have an LM help generate. So it's a little bit like a different flow like you're talking about where like you're doing the iterations with the LM where I might start iterating for myself first and just doing all the parts that are like relevant. And then after that, you could go in and do an iteration there. But at least for me, I find that that's relevant to still have, I don't lose that sense of like what's actually going on here. And then you can like spot things when you didn't see the LM output or whatever, at least for me, but
Right. What you're talking about is more on the designing the
yes.
Designing and understanding the problem, right?
Yeah. It's actually my friend Jeremy Smith, who I did the YouTube videos with. He had a great way of phrasing this because he's done a lot of design stuff. He's now a Rails developer and also hosts the Indie Rails podcast and there's a bunch of stuff there as well. But he he knew about this idea of like the design phases where there's both like convergent at the end, but then also it starts with like actually being divergent. And I think sometimes in like maybe the Rails space in general, I think we're only looking at the convergent phase where we're thinking everything's just like close to done. And then we're just like, we just collapse everything and then we're done now. But what I find is I would like there to be a little bit more space for like divergent thinking in the start where the problems just seem to grow and like you have no idea what's going on here and like where's this and what are we even solving here or whatever. At least I find that's helpful to have that space, a little bit more open-ended, a little bit more breathing room to also like think and figure out like, is this, we could generate a whole prototype with this, but what is that actually going to tell us? What do we even know about the problem yet? So it's more about like that problem exploration as opposed to like the pure execution fast or whatever, which definitely has a place, like you're saying, in like the good enough scenarios. But I'm like, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Very interesting. Awesome. So, we're almost running out of time. So I want to ask you one last question. What is the future for you? What are you looking forward for the next year or so?
Yeah, for me, it's actually RV. We've been working on Spinel. We've been working on this tool called RV that helps manage rubies. And like we've done some work on like a homebrew. We have like a portable Ruby thing. So you can compile Ruby and move it to separate directories. There's a whole thing there. Andrew just did a talk on it that explains it much better. But the idea is like it's a Ruby manager for the future, essentially, where we've done a little bit of work to make sure we can pre-compile Ruby. So you can install Ruby in like a second. So you could do brew install RV Ruby install, and then like you basically have Ruby right there instead of waiting for like 5 minutes for it to install and everything. And then the other thing we're looking at there is also, well, what if it could also manage dependencies or even generate its own tools? I forgot to say this at the front, but it's inspired by Python's UV. And that's also where the name comes from. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Like, again, if you do like brew install RV and then RVX Rails new, my app, then you could be like up and running for like a new Rails app, like within less than a minute at least, I don't even know, like I can't remember how fast it is to install. It takes a little bit to compile some of the gems, which we're also looking at, but that's kind of where I'm at. Actually, that's one thing. And then another thing is we're also building Gem Co-op. I've been working a lot of the domain modeling there and like fixing all the issues and figure out what else we want to do, because I'm kind of curious about what else we could do for like the package recurrency side of, how else can we shape some of these things, because I have some ideas there I want to explore. So that's where that goes.
Interesting. Yeah, because I remember there was a gem many years ago that would take your Ruby applications and compile it into a single binary, quote unquote, because it wasn't a binary, it was just, a package, right, of Ruby. It was this idea of running binary, to make a single file for the application, right? Yeah, but I do like your approach of RV, because it's it's something that would allow us to package pieces of code functionality without having to deal with the hassle of installing Ruby and everything else, right?
Yeah, like my big wish with it is essentially that it could enable like a whole new era of Ruby tooling, because it makes it a
Right.
lot easier to like send a script to someone, because you could do the shebang, whatever, like exclamation mark /user/bin/env, and then you could do RVX, or I can't remember the syntax right now. And then if you have RV installed, that's all you need. And we like install Ruby for you. We'd install dependencies for the script as well. And so
Right.
then you can be up and running in like very quickly. And so that would enable a lot more people to ship things in Ruby, where I think, right now, the way people install Ruby is with your Ruby build, which compiles on your machine, which makes sense. Like that's how we've done it for a long time. But I think it actually misses, it doesn't let new people join as easily, because they look at stuff like Python now or like Node or whatever, where they don't have to wait 5 minutes. So why do we want to look at Ruby? And so I think there's something interesting there of just like moving that goalpost to be like, we can actually catch up to this stuff and make it really fast to get someone else started. So people in your team where they might be front-end people and they haven't really looked at the Rails backend, all of a sudden it makes it a lot easier for them to get started, because if they have a working homebrew installation, they can just brew install RV and then be up and running really fast. That's the goal, at least, to have more people try out Ruby and be able to like run it locally, and they have a full install, they can do whatever with it, and then they can use a tool that might happen to be written in Ruby and they don't have to care, essentially. So that enables more people to write more tooling in Ruby, because it's a lot easier to get people started for all the reasons that we want people to write in Ruby, as opposed to like C or whatever. It's not going to be the fastest, but it's going to be, like you're saying, good enough earlier, more than good enough.
Yeah, for small tools, command line interface or things like that, I think it's very powerful. And with all the mature gems that we already have for databases, you can actually build a much more complex application and just say, RV run application, and boom, you have it running, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You could use like Active Record or the SQL gem and then connect to maybe like a SQLite thing locally that runs there, and then it could do stuff for you and store, I don't know, whatever you want to do with there. Local analytics, I don't know what you want to do, but like, that's up to the tooling developer, but stuff like that, essentially.
That's amazing. Yeah. Looking forward to see how you take that to the next step, because I'm interested in that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the next step is like RV is now at like 0.6, so it's still, development and everything. The next thing is like 0.7 release is RV sync, which sort of functions similar to bundle install. So it'll just like read your gem file and like figure out how to resolve it if it needs to, and then install other dependencies. We already got RV clean install, which is analogous to bundle install -- frozen, which is what you would do for deployments, and that's pretty fast. I'm using it locally for Gem Co-op, and it's just like installs pretty fast. The slowest thing now is like installing, having to precompile gems. So that's another thing we're looking at, where like, can we precompile those and ship them to people? So we also, just like we do for Ruby now, the Ruby installs, and make that really fast, because then we can install everything in like less than a second, and then we just up and running really fast. So that's the goal.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm interested in running RV run Jekyll and then being able to compile the site.
Yeah.
Because I'm using, what is the name? Cloudflare, right? And basically what it does is install all Ruby, install, Jekyll, install the gems, everything. So it takes like 5 minutes to then run the static site. And I'm thinking, well, if we have an RV run Jekyll, then that would be, mind-blowing.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it would already work for that. Almost like if you have a
Nice.
result, if you have like a gem file to log already, then I think it should work by now. Probably. I mean, we could try it.
Maybe.
I haven't tried it with Jekyll, but yeah.
I'll let you know when I do. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Kasper,
Well,
it was truly a pleasure to have you here today. We're running out of time, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm looking forward to stay in touch, and and I'm wishing you the best on this new co-op because I think it's an innovative new way of organizing the team, and I wish you all the success.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, and great to be here. Yeah, if people want to learn more, it's just spinel.coop. That's the way you head there, and then you can see more about who we are and what we've done so far on our blog, and that's where we're at about RV as well. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
We're going
thanks
to
a
leave
lot.
the links on the description below.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you, Kasper.